Welcome back to my channel. The wind swept across the endless plains of Texas as the sun sank behind the distant hills, painting the sky with streaks of crimson and gold. But for John Maverick, the widowed rancher, the beauty of the sunset had lost all meaning since the day his beloved wife, Clara, breathed her last breath in the small wooden house they had built together. It had been 3 days since she left him. 3 days since she whispered her final words. "Take care of our baby, John. Promise me." And there he was now, sitting by the dim fire, clutching the tiny newborn girl swaddled in a torn blanket, her cries piercing through the silence of the desolate ranch. His heart ached with every sound she made, because he knew she was hungry, desperate for the mother's milk that would never come again. The night was cold, cruel, and heavy with loneliness, and as the coyotes howled in the distance, John realized he had no milk, no nurse, and no one to help him in miles of dust and emptiness. He was a man used to hardship, drought, wild cattle, bandits. But this was different. This was the helplessness of a father watching his infant fade away in his arms. He rose slowly, exhaustion pulling at his limbs, and looked toward the horizon where the nearest town lay, almost 20 miles away. His horse, Dusty, neighed softly as if sensing his master's pain. Without a second thought, John wrapped the baby tighter, slipped her into a sling against his chest, and whispered, "Hold on, little angel. Daddy's gonna find you milk." He saddled Dusty, ignoring the stabbing grief in his heart, and rode into the night, guided only by moonlight and love. The road was long, rough, and unforgiving. The cold wind bit into his skin, dust whipped into his eyes, and each mile stretched like eternity. He prayed silently, not for himself, but for the tiny soul sleeping against his heart, her breath warm and fragile. At dawn, his lips were dry, his body trembling, but he pressed on. When he finally reached the small town of Elridge, he was met with silence and shuttered windows. The townsfolk were afraid. The fever had spread and many families had fled. The only store left open was run by an old man named Harris, who looked up from his counter in shock as John stumbled through the door. "I need milk," John gasped, "for my baby." Harris looked sorrowfully at the man. There was no cow's milk left, no wet nurse, no supplies. The trains had stopped coming weeks ago. "There's a widow up north," Harris said quietly. "She's nursing her own child. Maybe she'll help." Without wasting a second, John turned his horse northward. The journey took him through thick woods, across shallow rivers, through biting rain that soaked him to the bone. His baby whimpered softly, her tiny fists clutching his shirt. Several times he thought she had stopped breathing, and each time he broke down, begging the heavens not to take her too. His mind replayed the memories of Clara, her laughter as they built the corral, her tears when they lost their first child to fever, her promise that this baby would live. And every time despair tried to break him, her voice echoed in his mind. "Take care of our baby, John." That voice became his strength, his guiding star in the storm. He reached the widow's cabin by dusk. Smoke rose from the chimney, and through the window he saw a young woman rocking her own infant. When she opened the door, her eyes widened at the sight of the drenched, shivering man holding a nearly lifeless baby. "Please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "She hasn't fed in 2 days. Her mother's gone." Without hesitation, the woman, Maria, took the baby into her arms and wept softly as she nursed the child. Tears streamed down John's face as he watched his daughter finally feed, her cries fading into peaceful silence. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Maria told him to stay the night, to rest by the fire. She fed him bread and soup while he sat quietly, eyes fixed on the sleeping baby. "Your wife?" Maria asked gently. John nodded, unable to speak. She placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Then your child will live, because you didn't give up." Those words settled deep into his soul. For the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of peace. The next morning, the sun rose golden over the plains, and John stood by the doorway, holding his daughter close. He thanked Maria with all his heart, and promised to return with supplies once he could. On his way back, the land seemed different, alive again. The same road that had once felt endless now shimmered with hope. He reached the ranch by evening, his heart lighter, though the pain of loss still lingered like a shadow. He buried his face in his daughter's soft hair and whispered, "We made it, my little angel. You and me, we're gonna be just fine." Days turned into weeks. John worked harder than ever, raising cattle by day and rocking his baby by night. Sometimes when the wind howled across the prairie, he imagined Clara's voice carried in it. Proud, gentle, watching over them. He named the baby Grace, because she was exactly that. The grace that kept him alive when everything else was gone. Grace grew stronger with each passing day. her laughter filling the empty house that once echoed with silence. The townsfolk who heard his story began to call him the Milk Rider, the man who rode through the storm for his child. They said it was love that saved her. And maybe that was true, because no force in the world is stronger than a father's love for his child. Years later, when Grace learned the story, she would look at her father with tears in her eyes and whisper, "You're my hero, Papa." And John would smile, his eyes glistening, and say, "No, darling, your mother's the hero. I just kept my promise." As the seasons changed and the ranch thrived again, John often rode to the hill where Clara rested. He'd bring Grace along, and they'd place wildflowers on the grave. Grace would giggle and tell her mother about the calves and the garden, and John would close his eyes, feeling the wind brush his face, warm and tender, like Clara's touch. The story of the widowed rancher spread far and wide, touching hearts across the frontier. People spoke of his courage, but John never saw it as courage, just love, simple and pure. He would tell anyone who listened, "When you've lost everything, you learn what truly matters. It's not land, not cattle, not gold. It's the ones you love and what you're willing to do for them." His story became a legend, told around campfires by cowboys under starlit skies, inspiring fathers, mothers, and dreamers who had lost hope. And though time faded faces and memories, one thing never faded: the power of love, sacrifice, and a promise kept. So whenever the wind howls over the prairie, some say they can still hear the distant echo of hooves, the spirit of the widowed rancher who once searched for milk for his newborn, carrying not just his daughter, but the undying spirit of every parent who ever fought for their child. And friends, if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of love, courage, and the power of never giving up, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join us for more stories of hope, sacrifice, and the human spirit. Because somewhere out there, another story is waiting to be told just like John's. And maybe, just maybe, it'll change a life.